I was a 20-year-old female at the time, and I was just about to move out of my parents' house 2 weeks later. I was going to be moving in my apartment in the city. It was a Wednesday morning around 10 a.m. I was on a summer vacation and I was off from work that day, so I was still in bed. My parents had left for work earlier that day. Back then, my room was in the basement, and my window was right next to the stairs leading to the front door. I was woken up by the sound of someone walking up the stairs, and I thought it was odd, so I got up. I took my phone and I went upstairs to try and get a better look at who this could be. Once upstairs, I saw from the kitchen window a man leaving our front yard and going back to the sidewalk. I was very relieved and I thought it was probably just someone selling stuff. But then, the man turned around, went back into our front yard, and started walking toward the right side of our house where there was a door leading to the kitchen, right where I was standing. The man then knocked, and he had asked if there was someone home. Looking back, I should have said yes through the window, but I was so scared and confused that I didn't say anything back. He then walked back to the front yard and back on the sidewalk and started walking away. Again, I was relieved, and I then told myself that maybe it was just a friend of my dad's that I didn't know, and that maybe he was looking for him. This didn't seem right, but I was trying to find any reason for this man to be there other than wanting to break in. Just when I thought the man had left, I saw him come back yet again and walk to the left side of my house towards the backyard. Now, I was very scared at this point, and I knew he wanted to get in. I go to the front door, unlock it, and I waited for a couple of seconds. I then start to hear something cutting off the screen of my parents' bedroom window, and at that point, I'm literally shaking. I opened the front door quietly and ran out of the house, calling 911. Within about 5 minutes, the police arrived, but unfortunately, the guy had ran away, and they never did end up catching him. Needless to say, I was terrified my first 3 months alone in my first apartment. This happened only a month ago, and it doesn't really scare me anymore. It just constantly makes me think, what if? I'm in college, and I'm still living with my parents and older sister. It was spring break, and my parents went on a road trip while my sister and I stayed home alone. 2 nights after my parents left town, I was at the house alone because my sister was out with her boyfriend. It was around 5 or 6 o'clock, and I decided to go work out because I was really bored and I could use it. I live less than half a mile from a hotel, so I used their gym because it's so close. I was going to jog there like I usually did, but I changed my mind right before I left because I didn't want to walk back home from the gym. I knew that I would be all tired if I did that, so I got my keys and I decided to drive to the gym. I walked out of the front door and I paused for a second because I got a random feeling to lock the front and back door. My mom is really paranoid about locking the doors and windows because she's scared that a crazy person will break in or hurt us, or worse, kill us. She always tells me to lock the door, but I rarely do, especially if I'm leaving the house for only a short period of time. But for some reason, I got a feeling to lock the doors. So I went back inside, locked the back door, and made sure to lock the front door as well when I left. I drove to the gym, and I was then there for about an hour and a half. Not long after I got there, I randomly got a really bad gut feeling that made my stomach twist and anxiety high. I also have paranoia about things like my mother, but it's different. For some weird reason, I had blamed the bad gut feeling on my house catching on fire, with no one able to save my dog because I had locked both doors. But it doesn't consume my thoughts or make me want to go home or anything. I finally leave, and I get back home in minutes. My house wasn't on fire, which I knew deep down that it wasn't anyways. So I get out of the car, and I walk to my front door, pulling out my keys to unlock it. But before I had even reached to unlock the door, I then paused because I saw a brown napkin-looking thing wrapped tightly around the door handle. My mind instantly went to the recent fentanyl poisonings, and how there were cases of things like napkins and bills being smeared with fentanyl, causing people to overdose when they touched them. I didn't touch it. I called my parents because I started to get scared, and I didn't really know what to do. My mother was understandably freaked out, and she told me not to touch it. I talked with my dad, and men being men, no hate, logic is appreciated here. He tried to be logical and then tell me that someone must have put an ad on the door handle and that another person must have ripped it off our door. I then FaceTimed them and I showed them what it looked like. It clearly wasn't an ad. It looked like thick paper bag material. I also made sure to tell them that I was staring right at the door handle before I left for the gym, and there was absolutely nothing on the door handle before, meaning someone came up and wrapped it around the door handle while I was at the gym. I was pretty freaked out, but it was early dusk outside, so there was still a good amount of light around me, thankfully. My mom calmed me down, but my dad was still thinking we were overreacting. I unlocked the door, got my gloves from my dad's truck, and I took the brown napkin thing off the door handle, throwing it on the ground very fast. I kept the gloves on, opened the door, went inside, put the gloves in the washing machine, then wiped my front door handle with Clorox wipes. I then shut the door and locked it, not knowing what to do with the paper bag that was just lying on the porch. I say paper bag now because as I looked at the bag on the ground through the window, I could clearly see that it was a small paper brown bag, and it was 100% not an ad someone puts on people's doors. It looked like the type of paper bag that holds sauces or silverware from a restaurant, and it was curled into a C shape from being wrapped around the handle so tightly. I kept watching outside my house through my windows, but I never saw anyone or even a feeling of being watched. I calmed down completely, and I had waited for my sister and her boyfriend to come home. I called my own boyfriend, and I told him all about it. He promised to leave me with Second Amendment protection for the rest of the time my parents were gone, because he was really creeped out that someone would come up and put a brown bag on our door, whether it had fentanyl or not. My sister came home, and I told her and her boyfriend everything. They were freaked out too, also assuming that there was probably fentanyl on the bag. Them being there gave me courage, so I went back outside with gloves on, and I picked up the suspicious brown paper bag. I went back inside to show them. They both gathered around me and then watched as I started to uncrumple the bag from its C shape. On the inside of the C shape, the part that was touching the door handle, there was a gooey clear liquid that had the consistency of runny snot smeared all across the inside of it. We all went silent as our fentanyl fears were even greater. I quickly closed the bag and then put it in the trash, taking off the gloves and putting those in the washing machine as well. That was the end of it though. Nothing new or weird since then. I really wish we had cameras or a ring so we'd have more information on who, how, and why. I would really like to know what you guys think it was. To anyone who hears this, do you think I'm overreacting? Do you think it really was fentanyl wrapped up in that tiny little napkin? Or do you think it was a sex trafficking tactic? I live near Houston, not too close, but a good distance. I know the sex trafficking is hot there. Or maybe it was someone who was just really high and just randomly chose our house to mess with and actually put snot on our door handle. But that's really not likely because we have police officers that stroll through the neighborhood. And people don't just walk around high like that. It's a small neighborhood too, only 8 streets. And even without the police officers, this is a decent neighborhood, with maybe a few but most likely no drug users. It's really just a bunch of old people. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Please let me know in the comments, because I still really wonder about it a lot. What happened in this story took place around 4 years ago. To set the scene, Me and my family live in what you would say is a nice neighborhood. It's outside of the city limits, and the houses are not right on top of each other, but you could walk to the neighbors within 3 minutes or so. Therefore, it's not really the type of neighborhood that many scary or weird things happen in. Although, the only time I've ever really been freaked out over something that happened while living in this neighborhood happened in early summer, while both of my parents were at work, while I and my brother were at home alone. I was around 16 at the time, so we were easily able to take care of ourselves. It was really starting to get warm outside and in our house, as we live in the South, so I then opened our sunroom door. I left the screen door shut, but I had opened the main door to let in some air from outside. After doing so, I lay down on the sofa and I ended up dozing off. I was awoken by the sound of the screen door handle turning and what sounded like knocking. It jolted me out of my sleep, and to my surprise, there were 2 men standing in the doorway, one knocking on the wooden part of the screen door, and the other was turning the handle as if it was just going to come right in our house. I leaped off the couch and quickly went to the door, asking them what they needed. The older of the 2 men stated that their car was right down the street and that their battery had died and they needed to be jumped off. Now, at 16, I wasn't really thinking that they had any malicious intentions. So I told them to wait a second, and I would call my dad and ask if he had any jumper cables in the garage. I closed the main door that had previously been open, and I went and got my phone off the sofa. The 2 men stayed in the same position and watched me through the door as I called my dad. From the start of our conversation, my dad was already really weirded out once I told him what happened. And then he told me he had the jumper cables with him in his truck at work, and that I just needed to tell the guys to try somewhere else. After getting off the phone with my dad, I went back to the door, and I told the men I didn't have any. I then apologized for being unable to help, and I shut the door back. I then just watched them as they walked just past the bushes that lined up our driveway. They got into an old silver sedan, and then drove out of our neighborhood very swiftly. I immediately started freaking out as they had literally just told me that their battery died and they needed to be jumped off. I called my dad back, and I then explained to him that the men had just gotten into a car that was supposedly dead and how they sped off. He told me to just lock the doors and to call 911 if anyone else came back to the house. Thankfully, no one returned, and nothing like that ever happened again. I can't even begin to imagine what would have been in store for me if there had been any jumper cables in my house.
This happened when I was home alone as a kid. It was the summertime, and I was home during summer break. Both of my parents were at work, and I think I was about 12 years old. I have an older brother, and he went to one of his friends' houses that day. When I was home alone, I would just hang out and do whatever. Usually, I would go on the computer that we had and play Minecraft or something like that. It was probably sometime in the early afternoon, and I had been on the computer in the living room for a while. I moved into the kitchen to get something to eat. The kitchen was at the back side of the house, and we lived in a split level. I will also mention that the neighborhood was pretty average and a little bit on the quieter side. It was when I was standing in the kitchen that I saw something out the window. I just barely saw movement at first, but it looked like somebody was walking by. I moved over to another window to see. That's when I saw a man walking to the back side of the house. He was wearing a sort of construction vest and had a hat on. I realized that it must be the meter reader. I remember that they came around every so often to our house. I calmed down almost immediately. I had been a little worried seeing a guy walking into our backyard. He went to the very back side of our house and near one of the basement windows. I went back to finding some food in the kitchen. After I was in the kitchen for a good 5 minutes though, I looked over and noticed that the guy was still there. Usually, they would come and go really quick and only be there for like a minute at most. I went back into the living room to go back on the computer, but a short time later, I just had the feeling that I should get up and make sure that the man was now gone. Maybe it was because I was home alone and a kid, so I was a little bit paranoid. I carefully walked back over to the window and could see that the man was actually still there. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't tell exactly what he was doing because I could only see part of him from the angle that I was at, which was higher up than he was. He seemed to be doing something and was near the basement window, but I couldn't tell what exactly he was doing. I thought about going downstairs and looking out of that window, but I knew that the man would see me right away if I did. I went to walk over to another window upstairs, which would have a better angle, but I had to be careful so the guy wouldn't see me. Unfortunately, I really messed up. As I was walking over, I accidentally hit a can that was near the edge of a counter in the kitchen. I knocked it over and it fell onto the ground. This made a loud noise, and the next thing I knew, I saw the man quickly walking away. He moved back to the side of the house. I moved to the front of the house, and I watched the man casually walking down the street until I could no longer see him. I felt like he was really suspicious. I questioned whether he was even a meter reader or not. Why would he leave so suddenly like that? For the most part, though, I was just happy that he was now gone. I went back to the computer. I stayed there for the most part until my brother and parents came back home. When they did, I didn't even think to tell them about the guy that had been there. I thought he was gone for good. My brother's bedroom, as well as mine, happened to be in the basement, and my parents' bedroom was upstairs. Because it was summertime, we would stay up pretty much as late as we wanted. I remember that on this night, my parents went to bed, and my brother went down to his bedroom. I stayed up and was on the computer. All of the lights in the house were off, except for a small lamp in the living room near me. I stayed up on the computer until I got really tired, which was probably at about 1 a.m. Then, I turned off the lamp and went downstairs to go to bed. When I got downstairs, I had to walk past a little living room that was in the basement in order to get to my bedroom. As I was walking past, I happened to see something in the window. The man was back. I could only see a figure of a man, but I could guess who it was. This was the same window that he had been at earlier in the day. I then heard noises coming from the window, as if it was going to come open. I was suddenly really afraid. It was really dark down there, and I hit the light switch, which I happened to be really close to. When this happened, it lit up the whole room, and I could no longer see the man very well. I heard some noise from right outside the window, though, and then it sounded like he was running away. I went running as well, but back upstairs into my parents' bedroom. I knocked on their door and yelled for them to wake up. About a minute later, my dad came out asking what was going on. By the time I explained it all, the man was long gone. My dad went out and inspected the house all around, though. He was able to find that the back window the man kept messing with had quite a bit of damage. It had almost came off. It was like the man had been trying to remove the window and get inside the house, and he was really close to succeeding. After that night, though, the man never came back. I remember being really scared for a while that he would, and I slept upstairs on the couch because I felt safer there. Luckily, he never did. This happened back when I was in college. During the summers, I lived back home with my parents at their house. I had almost the entire basement to myself, and they wouldn't really go down there much when I was gone. There was a big TV down there, and then my bedroom and a bathroom. It was really nice to have all of that space. I drove home from school after I had finished my finals and packed up my stuff from the college dorm. When I arrived back at my parents' house, they happened to be gone. They told me that they would be back in a few hours and were out for the night. That meant that I would be home alone. I did have my own house key, so when I got back, I was able to get inside. I spent the first bit of time unpacking a bunch of my stuff and putting some of it into storage and in the basement. I went down into the basement and I stayed in the main room and was using the TV for a while. It was then that I thought I heard a noise coming from inside of my bedroom. I hadn't been in there yet, and the door was closed. I didn't know what it could be, but I wasn't scared or anything like that. I casually got up and walked over to the door. Then I opened it. When I did, I heard the sound of my closet door closing. It was kind of out of my view, and when I looked over to it, the door was completely shut. Suddenly, I was now a little bit concerned about what this could be. Only a person could close the door like that, and I was home all by myself. I thought about going over and opening the closet door, but decided not to. I turned around and walked out of the room instead. I no longer wanted to be downstairs, and I went up into the living room upstairs. As I was up there, probably 30 minutes went by without anything happening. I was just watching TV and relaxing on the couch. Out of nowhere, I heard the sound of somebody walking up the staircase. I knew that it wasn't my parents because they weren't home yet. I looked over to the stairs. The person was not in my view yet, but I kept looking. Then I saw a man start to come into view, and he was walking up the stairs towards me. This guy looked a little bit older than me, but had a beard and long hair. He looked like he had to be on some kind of drug or something. As he approached me, I quickly got up. I backed away and asked him who he was. The guy didn't say anything. He just kept walking closer. I told him that he needed to get out of here or I was going to call the police. The guy didn't say anything though and kept getting closer and closer to me. I was backed up as much as I could and would soon reach the wall. He continued to approach me. I then ran to the side and was now in the back corner of the house. The guy kept coming near me. Then he started to charge at me. This guy had to be insane. When he lunged for me, I jumped out of the way. He caught part of my leg and I fell to the ground. The man fell also. I was able to get to my feet before he did, and I ran to the staircase and went down the stairs as quickly as possible. When I made it to the bottom, I opened the door and left the house. The crazy guy did the same, but a little bit after me. I went sprinting down the neighborhood street, yelling at the guy to get away from me. He stopped chasing me eventually, and kind of wandered off into somebody else's yard. Then I was finally able to compose myself and call 911. When the police got to my street, I didn't know where the guy was anymore. I had walked back to our house and was standing in the front yard. The guy ended up being found about 15 minutes later. I guess he went and hid in somebody's backyard and they saw him and called the police. The police happened to already be there a few houses away at my place and picked the guy up. I'm really not sure how he got into my parents' house or how long he had been there. I'm guessing he got in shortly after they left. I do know that he was there the entire time that I was, and that really gives me the creeps. I live by myself in an apartment. It's really close to downtown of a big city. There are lots of people that live in the area, but I've never witnessed anything that crazy until recently. A few months ago was when this story took place. It had been another long day of work and I had just gotten home. I worked a long shift and I love my job, but it can be very tiring. After walking home, I got into my apartment building and up to the 4th floor where my place was. I got inside, closed the door and locked it like I always did, and then headed to take a shower, put on some comfortable clothes, and go to bed. I had made it about 10 feet away from my front door when I heard the knob turning. Somebody was trying to get in. This was strange and something that had never happened before. I stopped in my tracks and then moved over to the door and looked out the peephole into the hallway. Nobody was there. Whoever had tried to enter, I guess, had just left. Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe it wasn't. Either way, I was really tired and just wanted to take a shower and go to bed. About 20 minutes later, I was in bed and just browsing on my phone before I fell asleep. During this time, all of my lights in my apartment were out, and it was completely silent inside. That's when I heard my doorknob being turned again. But not once this time, multiple times. There was no knock, but I knew whoever had tried to enter before was likely back. I couldn't sleep with the thought of someone trying to enter my apartment. I got up from bed and tiptoed over to the door to look out once again. This time, I saw somebody. A man stood there just outside of my front door. I kind of freaked out when I saw him. He looked kind of sketchy, wasn't well dressed or put together. He was just standing there and looking at my door. Then he tried opening it another time. He sort of looked around the hallway and then back to my door. I kept watching and he stood there for maybe another minute. Then he turned to the right and started walking away down the hallway. The hallway led straight down to the stairs and elevator area. I waited to make sure that the guy was leaving, and about 10 seconds after he left my view, I quietly opened my door. I snuck out into the hallway and took a few steps out to make sure that the guy was going to leave. Hopefully that would give me peace of mind and I could go back to bed. At first, I saw the man a good distance down the hallway, walking away still. He was almost at the end of the hall. But then, he stopped and turned around and faced me. He started heading towards me, and his walk quickly turned into a sprint. I hurried as quickly as I could to get back inside my apartment and close the door. As soon as I made it inside, I slammed it and locked it. The man reached the door probably a second later and tried opening it again. After he realized it wouldn't open, he pounded on the door a few times. I yelled to the other side, asking what the man wanted. He did not answer me, but kept standing there. I watched still from the peephole inside. He tried opening the door again. I yelled that I was calling the police, and then the man finally turned and left. Still, I wasn't convinced that he was actually gone. I waited around for about an hour, checking out my door every so often. He didn't return though. Finally, I was able to go back to bed. I haven't seen the man since that night, and looking back, I think he probably followed me home on the street. I might have even let him into my apartment building without knowing. I didn't really pay that good of attention as I walked home, but now I do.
I was 14 years old, and my mom and I had been living in a 3-bedroom double-wide trailer ever since we left my dad. My mom worked a full-time job, which meant that from Monday to Friday, I would have the house for myself for about 2 hours after getting home from school and before she got home from work. I usually would spend my time on my computer or working on writing my D&D campaign, and in no time at all, my mom would be home. At least, that was when I felt comfortable in my house. That all changed though. One day when I found myself walking in on a burglary in progress. I had just gotten home from school, and when I walked into my house, everything seemed normal. I walked inside and locked the door behind me before taking my shoes off. And as I was in the process of taking off my shoes, I could have sworn I heard something come from the room where we used to store our moving boxes in the back of the trailer. At first, I assumed it was just a box or the house settling, and I didn't pay the noise any mind. But before I could even stand up from taking my shoes off, I heard it again. This time it worried me a bit, so I decided to call out to see if my mom had come home early. But when I yelled out, there was no response. Still, something felt a bit odd to me, so I decided to check the room out real quick before getting comfortable. I poked my head through the door and looked around, but from what I could tell, nothing had changed, which reassured me that I had in fact heard the house settling. After that, I went about my normal routine. I stepped into my room and put my backpack on my bed before walking back out into the kitchen for a quick snack. I reached into the cabinet and pulled out a fruit roll-up. But before I could open it, I heard another sound coming from the back room. Only this time, it was followed by something that shook me to my core. After the sound of something thumping on the ground in the room, I heard what was undoubtedly a man let out a single cough. I dropped my snack and instinctively began running through the house and toward my bedroom. I'm not sure why I chose my room instead of the front door. Maybe it was where I felt the safest. But either way, I sprinted into my bedroom, which was 2 doors down from the back room, and without hesitating, I did the only thing I could think of, just like I had seen in movies. I grabbed my wooden desk chair and propped it up against my bedroom door. It was perfect timing too, because as soon as the door was wedged shut, whoever was in my house began banging up against my bedroom door. I fell back in fear and began looking around to think of what I could do next. And that was when I came to my senses. I looked over to my window and saw my escape. I was able to open it up and push the screen out before climbing through it. And since we lived in a trailer, the window were only about 5 feet off the ground. Once I was out of the house, I quickly ran through my yard and over to my neighbor's house. It only took him a few seconds before he answered the door after I began pounding on it and screaming for help. My neighbor opened the door and I explained to him what was happening. He didn't question it at all, and as soon as he saw the panic in my face, he let me into his house and we both waited there for the police and my mom to arrive home. The police showed up about 30 minutes before my mom did, but it was still too late to catch the intruder. By the time they showed up, he had already left the house. Not before destroying it though. All 3 of the rooms appeared to be ransacked, and my mother's jewelry collection was missing. For a while, I ended up staying at my neighbor's house or a friend's house after school while I waited for my mom to get home. I just wasn't comfortable being alone in my house anymore.